Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Robinson, the president of Spherix Global Insights, and today I am joined by Dr. Jay Wish, who is a professor of clinical medicine at Indiana University, where he is also the chief medical officer of dialysis services. Dr. Wish is a well-respected expert in renal anemia, and his affiliations and accomplishments are too long to cite for this interview, but suffice it to say, if you're in renal, you know who he is. Ironically, today is April Fool's Day, but I can assure you that today's topic really is no joke. We're here to talk to Dr. Wish about the news earlier this week of the FDA's decision not to approve Akebia's vadadustat, a novel oral HIF-PHI, and really issuing a complete response letter. And just for context, we should note that this is the second drug in the class to not pass muster with the FDA. Back in August, AstraZeneca and FibroGen suffered the same fate with roxadustat. So I guess we'll start there. First of all, thanks for joining me, Dr. Wish. It's great to have you here, but what is your reaction to this?
Well, thanks for inviting me, Jennifer. I was quite shocked. I can't put it in any less emphatic terms regarding the decision of the FDA not to approve vadadustat for dialysis-dependent CKD. I think a lot of us, having been familiar with the publications in the New England Journal, there were separate articles for dialysis-dependent and non-dialysis-dependent patients, felt that the approval for non-dialysis patients was iffy at best because they were not able to demonstrate MACE, major adverse cardiovascular event, non-inferiority in that population. But they did demonstrate quite convincingly, I mean, by all statistical standards that we generally use for these kinds of analyses, MACE non-inferiority for the dialysis-dependent population, equal efficacy. So we all assumed this is what the FDA was looking for, and it would be pretty much a slam dunk for approval in that population. So yes, we were all very, very surprised.
Yeah, it's interesting. Roxadustat had, I guess, the benefit or the disadvantage, I'm not sure which, of having an AdCom, several weeks before they received a CRL. Were you surprised that the FDA did not have an AdCom for vadadustat?
Yeah, I was surprised, and it made me think that whatever had transpired during the roxadustat AdCom was kind of leaving a bad taste in the FDA's metaphorical mouth regarding this whole class of drugs. Roxadustat had a rocky road. For those of us who viewed the AdCom, which I did, you might recall that it was an almost unanimous vote against approval for both the dialysis-dependent and the non-dialysis-dependent indications. So coming off of that, everybody felt that, oh, well, that's okay. Vadadustat would get a fresh start. They would be able to present their case to a jury of their peers, selected experts in the field of anemia and cardiovascular and all the things that roxadustat went through, and we felt they had a much stronger safety case than roxadustat did in the dialysis-dependent population. Remember, most of the concern regarding roxadustat in dialysis was not MACE. It was actually venous thromboembolism and vascular access thrombosis. And there was no data to suggest that vadadustat shared that safety complication issue. In fact, there were two presentations at ASN last year, ASN Kidney Week 2021, which specifically addressed thromboembolic complications and vascular access thrombosis in dialysis and non-dialysis patients, and showed that there was zero difference, non-inferiority, as compared to the comparator in those studies, which was darbepoetin. So we felt this was a pretty clean record with regards to the concerns that the CRDAC had regarding roxadustat and the ability for vadadustat to kind of plead their case, again, showing, as I said, a much better safety record, both in terms of MACE and in terms of venous thromboembolism, vascular access thrombosis, would make it, as I said, a slam dunk for approval. So the fact that there wasn't a CRDAC makes me think that the FDA, I can't say they already made up their mind, but let's say that the well had already been poisoned with this class of drugs, and they didn't. I don't think they considered the new data to the extent they should have.
Wow, it's interesting. You paint the picture of Roxa and saying they had the negative AdCom. There might have been reason for that decision. Spherix actually did a survey right after that decision, and we went out to over 100 U.S. nephrologists and asked them their opinion about the roxadustat decision, and more than 70% of nephrologists disagreed with that decision. And they said, you should have approved it. You should have approved it maybe with a black box or label update or a commitment for a post-marketing, study. But we need these drugs. Why are nephrologists clamoring so much for this class?
Well, we do need these drugs. And ironically, the greatest unmet need is in the non-dialysis population because these patients just don't get treated well. Erythropoietic stimulating agents, ESAs, they're difficult to administer. They have to be given as an injection. Many patients have to go to a healthcare facility to get these injections. And it's just a burden for them. And, they need iron. Many of them need IV iron. And as you're aware, part of the mechanism of action of the HIF stabilizers, HIF PHIs, is to improve iron absorption, iron mobilization. So the iron requirements among patients receiving HIF PHIs generally tend to be less than those receiving ESA. So again, you have kind of a double whammy in terms of logistical benefit, less need for or no need for parenteral ESAs, less need for iron, both perhaps because you can get more oral iron absorption, and it allows these patients to be more effectively treated. Many of you have seen the statistics that show if you are a new dialysis patient greater than 65 years old, where Medicare has the data, so we can be pretty certain what's going on, you're actually more likely to have received a transfusion during the 2 years prior to dialysis initiation than to have received either an ESA or iron. So, I mean, that's a pretty sad state of affairs if these patients are depending upon transfusions to treat their anemia, because we know that transfusions are bad in terms of allosensitization and decreasing the pool of potential donors that these patients can get for a transplant. And given the high priority that the US government has put on transplantation through the Advancing American Kidney Health initiative, it seems to be counterproductive to maintain the status quo, which ends up with transfusions that decrease transplantation. So we're all looking for ways to align these incentives, and the ability to administer an oral agent at home to a patient to treat their anemia so they avoid transfusions will help fulfill these goals of improved transplantation rates. So yes, the unmet need has not been met. And as long as the FDA has it in its mind that these agents are unsafe, then I don't think we're going to see an improvement in the treatment of anemia for the non-dialysis patient population. Now, as far as the dialysis patient population is concerned, most of those patients do okay with ESAs. Let's face it, about 80% of patients are achieving target hemoglobin levels with modest doses of ESAs, and they're not a problem. So that's not broke. We don't need to fix it. But there are maybe 10-20% of patients who are EPO-hypo responsive for a variety of reasons, but usually related to inflammation, that the HIF PHIs, at least based on their mechanism of action by suppressing hepcidin, probably are going to be more effective in raising hemoglobin levels and improving the outcomes, especially quality of life outcomes that will be related to a higher hemoglobin level. And then finally, again, going back to the Advancing American Kidney Health Initiative, part of that is to increase the rate of home dialysis. And the federal government is talking about, 40, 50+% of patients eventually being on home dialysis. So then you're faced with the same conundrum in terms of requiring a parenteral injection of an ESA to a patient who's at home, who's not regularly coming to a dialysis facility. And therefore, that's going to be an additional burden on the patients and is likely to lead to undertreatment of anemia.
Wow. Okay. So, we've got two strikes now, and we kind of have the lone survivor in the HIF field, if you will, and that's GSK's daprodustat. And public records suggest that there may be a filing for that in mid-2022. What does this bode for GSK and daprodustat?
Well, before I answer that question, let me just comment about the fact that roxadustat has been approved in a number of countries in the world. And the US FDA was really the only regulatory agency, I should say, that I'm aware of to not approve the drug. Roxadustat is approved in Japan, it's approved in South Korea, in Chile, and in the European Union. And vadadustat is also approved in Japan and is pending approval in the European Union as we speak. So again, the FDA seems to be an outlier in terms of its focus on, the safety issues that really may not be that, I think, dangerous, and certainly could be addressed with pharmacovigilance, long-term phase 4 studies, following up, reporting registries, et cetera, to be sure that these agents are as safe as they seem to be, at least in the phase 3 studies where MACE has not been an issue. All right, so that leads into your question about daprodustat. Okay, daprodustat seems to have the cleanest record, if you will, in both dialysis and non-dialysis patients with regards to safety. Okay, so if you look at the publications in the New England Journal that came out last fall, kind of coincident with the ASN meeting where these data were also presented by Dr. Singh, what you see is non-inferiority for MACE in both dialysis and non-dialysis based on the intention to treat analysis, which is the gold standard in terms of being able to decide whether or not a drug is safe or not safe. Okay, so they passed that muster. They also demonstrated similar efficacy. In the dialysis population, it was even cleaner because whether you use the intention to treat analysis or the on-treatment analysis, which only looks at the patients while they're getting the drug, be it the comparator or the active treatment, plus a time afterwards, usually 28 days, then again, no difference in MACE, okay? And then as far as other adverse events of special interest that they specifically address that are based on, the mechanism of action of the drugs and some of the pleiotropic effects that they could possibly have, daprodustat passed everything. I mean, as far as the dialysis population, it was a shiny, clean record, and maybe even a little cleaner than vadadustat. Though vadadustat was pretty clean, okay? And I think what happened in the dialysis population with vadadustat, even though kind of I'm going back to that, is that what the FDA did is extrapolate some of the safety issues that they saw in the non-dialysis population to the dialysis population. And they in the complete response letter, which we don't have the whole text of that. What we have is what the Akebia people released as a press release. The FDA seemed to have cited hepatocellular injury and vascular access thrombosis, or VTE, venous thromboembolism. When you look at the vadadustat data from the New England Journal, and specifically the supplement, which is much more detailed in terms of the adverse events that were observed, those were not observed in the dialysis population. Those were observed in the non-dialysis population, and then the FDA chose to extrapolate that to the dialysis population. And when I look specifically at the supplement for the non-dialysis study of vadadustat in the New England Journal, what I found was hepatocellular injury wasn't even an issue. If you go to, and I encourage all of the viewers to do this, go to the New England Journal and then find the supplement for the non-dialysis article for vadadustat. It's table 7, and what you see, and I'm looking at it on my other screen now, is transaminases increased, and I think that's what they focused on. So in the vadadustat population, it was 1.8%, and in the darbepoetin population, it was 1.0% for the incident dialysis patients, the previously untreated. And if you look at the previously treated with ESAs, it was actually no different. It was 1.2% for VADA versus 1.3% for Darby. So if the FDA is looking at data this minuscule, this I consider to be insignificant because, there's going to be random effects here, and using that not only to contribute to the rejection of the drug in the population that was studied, but also to contribute to the rejection of the drug in a different population, because this was not seen in the dialysis population, then I worry about daprodustat, because daprodustat did have some issues in the non-dialysis population with regards to esophageal and gastric erosions, which were not seen in the dialysis population, as well as increased cancer. Okay, so again, not in the dialysis population, but if the FDA decides to say, okay, these are dangerous drugs in the non-dialysis population because of those two particular issues, and then we're going to extrapolate that to the dialysis population where they weren't seen, then I do think that jeopardizes the approval of daprodustat in both populations.
Wow. So I guess cautious optimism?
Cautious optimism.
Word of the day.
I really hope that daprodustat gets a CR DAC to present the data.
Yeah.
Because I think what happened to vadadustat to me was, I mean, I don't want to call it a railroad job, but it seemed like the FDA had only almost kind of made up its mind based on the roxadustat data. They said, oh, hip stabilizers, they're dangerous, they're messy, we don't want to have to deal with them. Don't confuse us with the facts. No, don't convene a CRDAC where we can actually hear the experts question the sponsor and find out really what's going on so we can take that under advisement before we make our decision. I think the FDA had already made up its mind.
Wow, that's too bad. I do have to ask, it does seem as though novel nephrology drugs are having a more difficult time getting off, across the FDA finish line. What are your thoughts about how this is going to impact innovation in the space? And what would you say to a company planning to come in? I mean, it hasn't just been the HIF stabilizers. It's been other drugs as well.
Yeah, I agree that the recent track record of FDA approvals of nephrology drugs has been disappointing, but I still like to think that the FDA is going to continue to judge each of these drugs based on its own merit. Okay, because that's really what they should do. And to basically make a sweeping statement, oh, the FDA doesn't like new nephrology drugs, so forget it, don't develop any, it's not worth the time and the effort. I think that might be a strong statement. But as you point out, tenapanor was also rejected by the FDA, and that wasn't even for safety reasons. That was because they didn't think it worked well enough. Okay, and it did work okay. I mean, yes, it wasn't a bombshell. It didn't decrease everybody's serum phosphorus to normal, but it did decrease the serum phosphorus by a little degree. So why is the FDA saying, oh, you're not allowed to have access to this safe drug, and there was no issues with regards to safety, as part of your armamentarium, to use it either as an add-on to traditional phosphate binders or as an alternative phosphate binders if patients have difficulty using phosphate binders, because tenapanor did have the advantage of just a couple pills a day as opposed to 3 or 4 tablets or capsules with every meal. And again, choices are important. So as long as there's not a clear-cut safety issue, if a drug works, then I think we should have those choices. And I think it's disappointing that the FDA, as you point out, has had this recent track record in terms of not approving nephrology drugs. But I'm still half full, glass of water here. I like to think that any future drugs will be, evaluated, scrutinized, vetted, if you will, by the FDA based on its own merit. And hopefully we will see more innovation in this space. It's ironic that, again, the Advancing Kidney Health Initiative, as well as Kidney X, which is another big initiative in terms of innovation in nephrology, are both out there. They're federal programs that are basically saying, we really need to shake up nephrology and slow the rate of progression of CKD and decrease costs of end-stage renal disease care. And yet our hands are tied because we don't have innovation.
Absolutely. And so, I think we're in a wait and see to see what happens with daprodustat going forward. Any other thoughts? Anything I didn't touch on that you think is super relevant to anemia management today?
No, Jennifer, you were quite thorough as usual. And again, I would like to leave on a positive note with both roxadustat and vadadustat. Okay, the complete response letters didn't basically say go away and don't come back. I mean, they did leave open the possibility for additional studies that address the safety issues, and they were all safety issues. There's been no question with regards to efficacy of HIF PHIs. They all work. There's no question about that. It's all about the safety. And I don't think the FDA is requesting that they repeat, a 4,000 patient randomized controlled trial. I think what the FDA wants is, maybe a smaller study targeting populations perhaps that are at higher risk for some of these adverse outcomes. And I'm hoping, that if these companies, and again, these are small startup companies, Fibrogen and Akebia aren't, these aren't huge companies with deep pockets. They're going to need partners and sponsors to do these studies, and hopefully that funding will come as well.
Well, we can hope, and I think the saga continues. So I'm sure we'll be talking again. But as always, thank you so much for sharing your opinion. Really appreciate it, and I'm sure our viewers will too.
My pleasure, Jennifer. Great.
Take care.
Bye-bye.